Within 2 weeks, they tried it out. It worked. The formula held, stable and effective, cracking open a breakthrough worth more than $5 million in market value. Investors came back. The press heralded Whitmore Labs, and each headline featured the unexpected genius behind the solution. Lena did not seek fame. She sought opportunity. And she received it. The Whitmores granted her a full scholarship to pursue the study of chemical engineering. She took it on one condition: that her mother, Evelyn, never again clean floors for a living. The second time Lena entered that conference room, not a whisper, not a laugh. They stood to welcome her, not as the daughter of the maid, but as the girl who had accomplished what an entire team of specialists couldn't. And if you ask her how she accomplished it, she'll smile and tell you sometimes the person you underestimate is the one who's been listening all along. Her name was Lena Carter, and she was the sort of person you might see walking down a hallway without registering. Her mother, Evelyn, had been a housemaid to the Whitmore household for over 2 decades. The entire neighborhood knew the Whitmores. They were old money, the sort of family whose name was on museum wings and on charity gala stations. But their actual power was from Whitmore Labs, a subsidiary of one of the most well-known private research firms in the nation. Lena's earliest memories were of that grand mansion, the way the marble floors sparkled so intensely you could nearly see your reflection, the smell of fresh flowers in every hallway, and the hushed sounds of serious conversations behind closed doors. She was raised in the shadow of richness, but never within its warmth. Her existence was lived in the areas between the laundry rooms, the back stairs, the servants' kitchen, where her mother made tea trays for individuals who never discovered her name. She would usually follow her mother on most days, holding baskets of linens through rooms where lucrative business transactions were sealed, or carefully passing by giant glass doors where scientists in white lab coats hovered over odd machines. She would overhear snatches of their chattered technical jargon. She couldn't yet decipher graphs scribbled on whiteboards, numbers recited as if it were a coded language, and to them she was merely the maid's daughter, or so they believed. In reality, Lena had been paying attention, always paying attention. She may not have grasped the full implication at first, but she had a mind that soaked up details like dry earth sucks up rain. She heard every phrase, every out of place word, every peculiar fact that seemed to link to something else she'd previously heard. After assisting her mother with chores in the evenings, Lena would roam through the estate's less-traveled corridors. She had found a secret treasure there, the abandoned Whitmore Library. The family hardly used it anymore. Most of the research had long since been transferred to the labs in downtown, but the bookshelves were still laden with journals, notebooks, and scientific magazines that had not been disturbed in years. Some were so dusty you could write your name on the covers. She'd sit on the plush carpet beneath the high windows, the warm light of the lamps pooling around her, and thumb through page after page. Initially, the language was like a wall, compacted. Sentences, bizarre symbols, interminable chemical names, but Lena didn't quit. She read slowly, pronouncing words in her mind, writing down meanings in a tiny spiral notebook she'd stashed in her tote. But slowly, over time, something extraordinary occurred. The fog started to lift. The more she read, the more she started to see patterns. She'd see when one article was contradicting another, or when an old experiment looked similar to a piece of news she'd overheard from a scientist at the house. She began to ask questions nobody else thought to ask. Why did this formula have to be tested at that temperature? What would happen if one variable changed? Could two ideas from completely different fields fit together like puzzle pieces? But to the outside world, she was still just the maid's daughter, polite, quiet, invisible. She carried herself humbly, knowing that in a house like this, the fewer ripples you made, the better. Nobody knew that beneath her tranquil eyes, she was constructing a map in her mind. A web of association that, one day, would lead to an answer their top brass minds had been pursuing for years. And that day was sooner than anybody could ever have anticipated. Whitmore Labs had been in pursuit of a breakthrough recipe for years, something the board said would revolutionize the medical industry. It wasn't merely another research study. This was the type of find that could save thousands of lives and secure the company's position in history. The studies had been promising, with glimpses of potential that thrilled investors and the media, but every time they came close to a stable result, one key component of the formula failed. It always occurred in the same infuriating manner. At the very last phase, the compound disintegrated, as if not willing to comply. Each effort was a dead end. Months' worth of efforts down the drain. Funds were being lost, investor patience thinning, and the board of directors beginning to rumble about writing off. Late in the afternoon, the atmosphere within the Whitmore estate was thick with tension. Lena was walking down the long hall to the formal conference room with a fresh load of linens balanced in her arms. She could hear murmuring from behind the half-closed door, low at first, then higher and more cutting, like the whittle edge of a knife. She stopped. Within, two gray-haired senior scientists leaned against a huge whiteboard covered in chemical equations. Their lab coats were crumpled, their hair a little disheveled, and their voices had the weariness of those who had been up all night working. "This doesn't make sense," one of them exclaimed, throwing a marker on the table. "All calculations indicate it should work," and yet he swept his hand across the failed test results arrayed like a funeral procession on the gleaming mahogany table. The second scientist, older and more serene but no less frustrated, responded, "We've checked all the variables. The issue is not with the mixture, it's the reaction itself. But why? What are we missing?" Lena stood in the doorway, linens clutched in her hands. She had heard them talk long enough to know what terms they were employing. They were discussing a very peculiar chemical reaction, one she had learned about months ago in an old textbook hidden in the Whitmore Library. In that very journal, the author had explained how the very same reaction was failing over and over again until they had tested it in a completely different temperature range. The change had been marginal, imperceptible even, but had been the missing link. Her heart started racing. Could it be the same problem here? She remained there, considering her options. She wasn't where she was meant to be. She wasn't meant to hear. And she definitely wasn't meant to know about top-shelf research worth millions. The safest option, the prudent option, was to quietly move on, but something in her refused to let her go. One of the scientists looked around and saw her. His brows furrowed in gentle irritation. "Do you need something?" he said, his voice courteous but laced with the sort of distraction caused by being distracted from a puzzle. Lena let the words erupt before she could hold them back. "I think possibly the range of temperatures you're testing is too small." For a moment, silence. Then the younger scientist gave a short, incredulous laugh. The older one chuckled too, not in a cruel way, but in the way adults sometimes laugh when a child offers an answer in a conversation they think is far beyond the child's understanding. "That's sweet," one of them said with a faint smile, "but this is complicated work. We've got it handled." Her cheeks flushed. She nodded hastily, muttered an apology, and disappeared down the hallway. But even as she went, the idea wouldn't release her. She knew there was something there, something they hadn't attempted. She'd read the evidence herself. That night, she would make the choice to let it all go, or risk everything by saying something again. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. The city beyond the window of her apartment was still, but in her mind, ideas rattled back and forth like free coins inside a jar. She sat at the kitchen table, a single lamp providing a golden circle of light across the tabletop. Her crumpled notebook sat open before her, its pages covered with scribbles, arrows, and underlined words. She had summoned every recollection she could. Snippets from eavesdropped discussions at the Whitmore estate, bodies she had seen on half-blank whiteboards, and passages she recalled from those yellow journals in the library. She rewrote and rewrote the equations, nibbling on the tip of her pen, her tea cold on the side of the table. The hypothesis was easy enough to describe, but large enough to upend everything. What if the equation didn't fail at all? What if it was behaving just as it ought, just not in the conditions they had been experimenting? The concept wouldn't release her. She pictured the scientists tossing their heads, sending her on her way with a gracious smile. But she also pictured the moment they would finally understand that she had been correct. At sunrise, her lids felt gritty with sleeplessness, but her mind was set. She would not entrust this to fate. The following morning, she got herself dressed. It wasn't a lot. Her best dress was still second hand, smartly ironed the previous evening. But she bound up her hair and slipped her notebook under her arm. The journey to Whitmore Labs seemed longer than it ought to have done, each step a conflict of courage and sense. As she pushed through the glass doors, the receptionist glanced up from her monitor, raising an eyebrow. "Lena, do you have an appointment?" "No," Lena confessed, trying to keep her voice even. "But I need to see Mr. Whitmore. It's urgent." The receptionist paused, phone halfway to her ear. For a moment, Lena worried she'd be sent away, but after a brief call, she was instructed to wait. Minutes then, and she was led into a modern office that had the scent of paper and leather. Mr. Whitmore stood behind his desk, a man of imposing stature with silver at his temples and a kind of presence that filled the space. He had known Lena since she was a shy little girl following behind her mother, and the slight smile he shared with her was laced with curiosity. "Lena," he started, "this isn't please." She cut in, her tone firm but polite. "Just give me 20 minutes. There was something in her tone that stalled him. He motioned toward the table in the center of the room. All right, show me. Her fingers shook a little as she spread out her papers on the smooth wood. She spoke deliberately, in simple language, avoiding a refuge of jargon. She wasn't attempting to speak like a scientist. She was narrating a tale, a fabric of data points and human reason, joining dots others had overlooked. She recounted the chemical reaction, how it always broke under the present temperature range, and how expanding it would stabilize it. Mr. Whitmore sat back, waiting. A director of laboratories called to her office mid-sentence stood beside her, page turning her notebook. His forehead creased, his eyes scanning her scribble. When she was finished talking, the room was silent. Lena froze, not wanting to see their faces. Then the lab director spoke, softly to himself. This could work. Within a fortnight, Whitmore Labs found a gap in their calendar to try out Lena's concept. She wasn't present in the room when the initial trials were initiated, but she paced the corridor outside, her hands ringing together, picking up fragments of words from behind the shut doors. Each tick of the clock on the wall passed like an hour. Then, in the late afternoon, one of the aides came running out of the lab, clutching a clipboard, eyes open wide. "It's holding," she gasped. "The formula's holding steady." Lena nearly didn't believe it. But then another scientist appeared, then another, all smiling, some shaking their heads in amazement. The response they had wrestled with for decades, the one that had soaked up millions in research, dollars, was now stable, efficient, and reproducible. Throughout the course of the next few days, they conducted additional tests, this time with Lena present, invited to watch. She wore a crisp white lab coat that was slightly loose on her figure. Observing the graphs across the monitors remained precisely within tolerance. It wasn't an accident. Her idea had opened up the key element, turning the project from an expensive failure into a multi-million-dollar success. Within the month, Whitmore Labs had been granted new capital. Investors who had been seconds from withdrawing returned with interest, some even doubling their initial bids. The media got wind of the story, and before long, every business magazine and science journal had the same headline in varying words: "The unexpected genius who saved the formula." Reporters demanded interviews, TV producers demanded she appear on morning shows, but Lena did not hunger for the spotlight. She did not desire to have her photo plastered across news feeds or her voice heard on talk radio. She longed for something much simpler and much more valuable, a future she could create with her own hands. When Mr. Whitmore summoned her to his office one day, he didn't mince words. "You've altered the trajectory of this company, Lena," he told her, "and I believe it's time we assisted in altering the trajectory of your life." He pushed a crumpled document across the desk. "A complete scholarship to chemical engineering school. Anywhere you'd like." Lena's breath caught. She picked up the paper, her fingers trembling as she scanned the details. Tuition, housing, books, all covered. It was everything she had dreamed of, and more. But she had one request. "Sir," she said quietly, "I'll accept, but only on one condition." Mr. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "Name it. Now that my mother never has to clean another floor again." Her voice didn't shake. It wasn't a request, it was a statement. For an instant, the room was silent. Then Mr. One was silent, then Mr. Whitmore smiled, not the polite, formal smile he automatically gave most people, but a warm, true one. "It's settled then," he said. News spread quickly. Evelyn, in her cleaning uniform, was standing in the hallway when Lena encountered her. "Mama," Lena said, fighting to keep tears at bay, "you're finished. No more mopping, no more nights. You can sleep now." Evelyn attempted to protest, to tell her daughter she did not mind the work, but her voice broke before she could get out the words. She clung to her daughter tightly, and in that instant, all the years of scrimping and hard work seemed to melt away. The first time Lena walked into that conference room at Whitmore Labs, the air felt different. The same scientist who used to label her the maid's daughter now stood to welcome her. No snickers in the back, no side glances, just nodding respects. She was no longer an outsider. She was the young woman who had accomplished what a whole team of experts could not. Standing there, she thought about the night she'd sat in the Whitmore library, turning the pages of old, forgotten journals. She thought about the sting of being underestimated, the weight of being invisible in plain sight, and she realized something. Sometimes the people closest to the problem aren't the ones with the solution. Sometimes it's the quiet observer in the corner, the one no one thinks to ask. When later asked how she had managed to solve something that had stumped a team of elite scientists, Lena would reply with a smile. Sometimes the person you least expect is the one who's been listening all along, and she wasn't just whistling.